Pham is a great YouTuber, but what's not as clear is whether or not she's a great author. I've seen a lot of her friends review her book, but I haven't seen a lot of unbiased opinions. So for this week's video, I'll be reading Pham's debut novel, Just Friends, in order to determine whether or not I think it deserves the praise that it's been getting. Yesterday was March 3rd, Haley's book release day, and my package actually came in the mail. I'm so excited, it feels like Christmas. Oh my god, there she is on the back. Famous. Let's get some book flip through ASMR. How does that sound? Let me know if y'all want an ASMR video. I haven't seen too many ARC reader reviews of this book, aside from that one where she was super freaking hateful. So I'm really curious to see what I'm gonna think about it. Oh my god, the sun is blinding me. Okay, we need to go to a new location. I'm pretty sure Blair and Declan are childhood friends, so I think we get a past timeline. I also think this book heavily dives into grief, and I know that Haley is a big fan of Emily Henry, so I'm expecting that we're gonna pay particular attention to the female love interest and her friends and her life, and maybe even steer away from the romance and into women's literary fiction. Oh, you are actually kidding. I'm gonna try and move the camera to avoid this. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is her first novel, so I'm not expecting anything revolutionary, but I do hope that it's good because like I told you guys, I'm gonna be honest. So if I don't like it, you're gonna be the first to hear about it. We are not going to be shaming the author. So if you're coming here just to leave hateful comments about Haley, it's not the place, bro. It's just simply not the place. If you have critiques about the book and you've actually read the book, feel free to leave them in the comments and we can discuss, but we are not bringing the author into those hateful reviews, okay? I'll see you guys as soon as I have some updates regarding this book. I'm so freaking excited to start it and I hope it's good. I hope it's good. I hope it's good. Bye. There's acclaimed authors leaving some very high praise on the front and on the first page of her book. On the front, Lynn Painter, yes her, says, a heartwarming second chance story that contemporary romance fans will adore. An absolute must read. And then the first page, which also that's really cute to have some art on the inside cover, and she has some on the back as well. Two cute little pigeons.
Two blue-footed boobies.
So we had that quote on the front by Lynn Painter, but we also have a quote on the inside, some advance praise. Vari McFarlane, I don't know if it's Vari or Mari, champion of reading Haley, has written a beautiful, sensitive second chance romance that her millions of fans are going to love. I was reminded of the warmth and heart of Emily Henry. I did mention that. Just Friends is so assured and confident, it's hard to believe it's a debut. Haley is a big new talent for the genre. So that's incredibly high praise. That is hiring my expectations, I'm not gonna lie. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess we'll see. We have so much to talk about regarding this book, like genuinely so much. I don't think I've ever marked this many points and taken this many notes on a book review for this channel before. So you need to find a comfy spot, you need to grab a drink, and you need to get settled because we are gonna be here for a minute. And that actually pains me to say because today is actually really hot in Texas. I'm about to start sweating, but we need to get through this. So I'm going to persevere for you guys. This book follows Blair and Declan, and they used to be childhood friends in a town called Seabrook, California. They were friends for a good 12 years of their lives, so they knew each other very well until there was a falling out that caused them to separate and not talk for 4 years. So you better believe I'm actually terrified to finally get to the third act conflict because if it's bad, we already know it's going to tank my rating. So I am so scared, but we'll see. I'm 25% through the book now, and I will say I am really impressed by Pham's writing. This is a debut novel, and I keep having to remind myself of that genuinely because I really do believe it's very well done. The book is incredibly descriptive and the language isn't overly complicated, but she uses a lot of analogies and some figurative language that at times can be a little bit corny, but overall, most of the time it's very well done, and I think it actually adds to the reader's ability to illustrate an image in our heads. And I've highlighted so many of these moments because they've been truly so good. For instance, at this point in the book, we're in the past and Blair is talking to Declan. Declan actually got invited to go out with his football player friends, but he actually declines because he's hanging out with Blair. And this is Blair's internal monologue, but only the normal amount of disappointment when you're having fun and don't want it to end, of course. It's not because if we stop hanging out now, I'll have to spend the hours before normal bedtime warding off replays of each scene in our day in painful detail, overanalyzing each moment, and then overanalyzing why I'm overanalyzing our friendship and if it means I'm starting to develop feelings that would ruin it. I feel like that's a perfect description of a young kid spiraling about whether or not their crush likes them back. I think she really has done the past timeline justice justice. And the book overall does feel on the younger side of a contemporary romance. I feel like most contemporary romances out in the space right now are typically dealing with women and men in their 30s. But in this book, the max age that they get to is 21. But I do feel that they read a little bit older than that, which in my opinion is a good thing. I wouldn't want it to feel like I'm reading YA. It does though remind me a little bit of Lynn Painter, and she is a YA author, but it also reminds me of Emily Henry in certain regards. And I think that's because of the inclusion of figurative language when describing things like love or loss or grief. I'll try to find another example of something like that. This is such a relatable example of returning to a town in which you have memories with somebody that you loved, but who is now somebody that you're not in a relationship with anymore. The first year was especially difficult. The wounds of Declan and mine's separation were still fresh. Coming home was like walking through a city full of landmines. Street names weren't just street names. They were the titles to bittersweet memories. Late nights spent talking in Declan's car, playing me songs from strange, obscure bands that he'd recently discovered. Him looking over at me in the dim street lamp's glow, waiting urgently for my face to give away my reaction. I loved that about him. How he loved watching me experience something he discovered on his own. Like, that is so adorable and relatable, and it's kind of giving Emily Henry. Like, it's kind of giving, there's a deeper meaning here that I'm hinting to you, but I'm not fully telling you. It's relatable and beautifully innocent and playful. I'm really enjoying so many of these little moments that Haley is including in the book. And I don't feel like I'm doing them justice. I do think that the context of the novel in its entirety is important for these moments to have the impact that they do as you're reading them, because obviously these characters are being developed as we read, and the more we understand Blair and her childhood trauma, the more we can empathize and sympathize with the way that she acts towards other people and towards herself. She has a lot of trauma that has been taught to her in a way. Her mom is somebody that doesn't trust men because of her experiences, but she's taught that subconsciously to Blair. So all of her actions are through that lens. She is being shaped by her experiences, and that's causing her to react in ways that we might not because we have different experiences than Blair. And here's a little bit more on that. All men leave at some point. It was the motto I spent countless nights overhearing her preach during late night conversations on the phone or with Lottie in the living room when I was supposed to be sleeping. It's just not worth it, she'd say, clucking her tongue. All men leave or fall out of love at some point. You just have to accept that and move on. She would say it flippantly, like becoming a single mother is just something to be expected. That's not true. It can't be, I remember thinking as a naive child. But my absent father and ghost of a childhood friend would beg to differ. She was right, and I felt stupid for ever believing I could prove her wrong. So these characters are so much more complex than surface value would allow you to perceive. But obviously in this book, they get to know each other deeply and they know each other's wounds. So it does make me wonder again about the third act conflict and whether or not I'm going to be okay with it. Because if these characters know each other so deeply, you would expect them to understand when one wrongs the other, but we'll see. Obviously, you guys know that the third act conflict can make or break a book, and I am very worried that it could potentially break this one. I do want to also mention that Lottie is Blair's aunt in this book, and she is suffering with stage 4 cancer. And I only say that because I do want to give you guys a trigger warning for that. This book does talk about grief and Blair's relationship with it, so do beware that we are going to be discussing grief heavily. It hasn't been bad so far, but like I said, all of Blair's experiences are influencing the way that she's acting in her present reality. So we're in no way safe or removed from the grief that she experiences earlier in the book within the latter chapters. And like I mentioned, both of these characters are complex. Declan is actually somebody that's kind of dealing with the pressure of his father living his dreams out through his son. So Declan's dad is somebody that really wants him to pursue football with all his might so that he can end up in the NFL. So we get a lot of interesting moments and conversations between Blair and Declan and how much this pressure is affecting him. And I really enjoyed this description specifically. The start of his ambition could have been credited to his dad forcing him to train at a young age, but eventually the lines between his father's demands and his own desire to win were blurred. Perhaps only being loved when he achieved was a form of training in itself. Now he did exactly what his father wanted for his life without having to be told. So again, this influence and this importance on their past shaping the way that they behave in their present is something that I'm always looking for in books, because it's something that I myself have realized we are only a collection of our experiences, and all of our judgments and actions and reactions are based on that foundation. That's why it's so difficult to change things that you were taught or that you believed as a child, because it's all shaped who you are as an adult. So I love that. I really, really love that Haley is paying attention to those things. It makes these book characters feel so much more like real human beings. I just want to read a few more of these really cute moments because I truly believe that Haley's past timeline is told so well. She really is able to embody that childlike whimsy, that fluttery feeling you get when you have a crush at a young age. This is a moment after Declan and Blair's first kiss, and we're in Blair's perspective. He pulls away slowly, seeming to savor the moment equally as much as he disbelieves it's happening. I actually giggle. The sound is light and giddy, like a child's surprised delight at seeing bubbles for the first time. A sound I've never heard come out of me. He responds with a low chuckle, vibrating the dense air between us. Like, cuteness overload. That's so cute. My last moment of praise before I stop glazing Haley, like goddamn, is that I really believe that this book is so well paced. At no point within this 25% have I been bored or have I thought that the plot wasn't moving along. So far, every section of the book has easily flowed into the next one, and that is something that I imagine is incredibly difficult for a first-time author to do. I felt like even by the second chapter of the book, we already had all the context we needed to start diving into the story, and that is so incredibly impressive. It's really obvious that Haley is a reader because I truly believe that a good reader makes a good writer, and she's seriously proving that to me. I don't know. Oh my god. Okay, my sister got in a car accident, so bye. Guys, I'm back. My sister did indeed get in a car accident. She's okay. She is completely fine, but her car is definitely not, so we had to go pick her up. She's home safe though, so I guess the only thing that's left is for me to continue talking about this book, which feels super odd given the circumstances, but we must persevere because it is now time to talk about the cons of this book. There have been a few lines that I've had to read a couple times through because they didn't make sense to me. Only a few, I would say literally about 2 or 3 up until this point. And I don't know if I wasn't understanding what she was trying to communicate or I just wasn't following that part of the story exactly, but they just felt like they weren't worded properly maybe. There could have been a little bit of reworking to be done. And the only other thing I will note is that Haley really likes to say that people's lips were pressed into a straight line, and she loves to mention the cobblestone pathways within this little town. So I do think that that could have been something that the editors paid particular interest to maybe switch those lines up whenever they came up for the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th time. But I feel like only having those complaints up to this point is incredibly impressive, especially because this is her debut novel. So like I said, I am very much enjoying it. I'm shocked by how much I'm enjoying it, but I'm really happy because like I've told you guys many times, I'm an honest girl. So if I'm not liking this, you will be the first to know. So I'll see you the next time I have an update. I'm officially 55% through the book, but I'm a little bit scared because I have been enjoying it so much. So I'm really worried that the third act conflict might ruin it. The third act conflict has so much to do with the reason for why these two haven't been talking for 4 years. So if it's not a strong enough reason, I'm going to be incredibly upset because I want these two to be together. I want them to be happy. And yes, the third act conflict did happen when they were younger, so there will be some grace on my part because I think they were 17 whenever they broke up and now they're 21. So they're still incredibly young. We make a lot of incredibly stupid decisions when we're in our early 20s. So I do have that in mind, but I'm still really scared. Same thing like last update, I have been annotating the hell out of this book. I think just because I have a physical copy and I don't get to read a lot of physical copies because I'm usually renting books from my library. And there are of course lots of things that I want to share with you guys, but I'm going to keep it to a minimum because I do really believe that if you don't have the full context of the book, these moments aren't as impactful and powerful as they have the potential to be. One of the main things that I highlighted is Haley's explanations regarding this love that they shared in the past that is no longer allowed to be explored in the present but is still very much there. And here is an example of that. Our eyes latch onto each other like a familiar forgotten thing being recognized again. Like all the history we've been pretending to forget comes racing back to us, too ingrained in the fabric of who we are to ignore. That's really good. That's really good. And if you have a relationship where it didn't work out but there was love there, you guys are going to relate directly to that. And here is another moment of Haley's simple but effective writing. The tear is just as shocking to me. I made no conscious decision to cry, but it was undeniably the truth. A single tear was sliding down my hand. The grief I've been trying to outrun has finally caught up to me, and it's mixing with the grief of Declan and me. Looking at me with recognition in his eyes ripped the safety pin out of my carefully contained emotional grenades. And like I've said, I've highlighted so many moments like that, but don't worry, we're gonna stop for now because I will keep going through it and you guys are gonna get sick of me. Another big big thing from the book that I really liked is Haley's exploration of female friendships and how complex it can be to hold on to friends that you were once close to but now don't have a lot of time for. I think she's explored that kind of weird gray area between being a full-blown adult and being a young kid that's able to hang out with your friends all the time, because that really is such an odd place to be in friendships, because you know you love these people but you don't have as much time to communicate with them, so there starts being bigger gaps between text messages and you feel guilty in a way, but also you know it's just kind of reality. And I also feel like the moments that she has written in have been super realistic, because we actually get moments where we're reading their texts or hearing their conversations and it all feels incredibly natural, so I'm really impressed by that as well. I also think that Blair's reaction to the grief that she's experiencing is incredibly relatable, and there were a lot of lines again that I highlighted regarding grief and Blair's reaction or lack thereof to just how emotionally difficult losing someone close to you is, and how much that can impact the way that you behave to the people around you, particularly how you might take out those overwhelming emotions on the people that actually love you and that want to be close to you in those moments, and also how hidden grief can be, how much you can be struggling and how someone can't necessarily see that unless you communicate it to them, so you might end up resenting the people around you that aren't asking and prying. That's another big thing, because Declan specifically always asks, especially in the past timeline. They were having conversations about Blair's mother and how she's a single mother. Blair found herself taking ownership for the fact that her dad left their family, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, especially those that have divorced parents. So I just loved being able to read about that and then also see Declan's perspective, who's someone that is not in any regard similar to Blair or Blair's past, but he's able to console her in ways that only he can, and a lot of the times is with humor. And I actually am finding that Haley is doing such a great job at incorporating casual humor, banter, and funny conversations into the text pretty seamlessly. It's incredibly difficult to make a joke in a book that actually lands to the reader, but I've found myself like nose laughing a few times, and again, I'm very impressed by that. So I've been smiling at Declan and Blair's past relationship, I've been giggling at the banter, and I even teared up a couple times because of Blair's relationship with her mother. The relationship between Blair and her mother in the book is so beautiful to read about, truly. And so far, from the last time I updated you guys to now, there have been no cons, but I am incredibly nervous because I just got to chapter 17 and Declan and Blair are about to talk about the reason why they stopped talking. So I'm so freaking nervous, because if this reveal is horribly stupid, I'm going to be honest to you guys, and I fear it might be, because they were just so young and they were both going through things that might have caused them to react in ways that are going to make me want to rip my hair out. But I guess the only way to find out is to read, so that's what I'm about to do. I will update you guys as soon as I have more thoughts. I look so scary. I am literally crying at the letter, like that was a tear on my lip. Baby little Declan, he's so sweet. She's coming to comfort me because she hears me crying. I was actually getting pissed off about the book before, but this letter kind of like made up for it a little bit. So now I'm struggling, trying to figure out what I'm gonna rate this. I guess we'll see in my final update. You guys, I'm in such a good mood because I just came out to film in the garage and it's like raining and I freaking love the rain, so the vibes are great. It's officially time to talk about this book. I finished it this morning and I have a lot to say, a lot. I'll try and keep it brief, but I'm such a yapper, like I can't not talk about this book. I do have a few more negative things to say than positive, just because the last time I talked to you guys, we hadn't understood the conflict that separated them for 4 years, nor had we read the third act conflict. And now I have the knowledge of both of those events in my mind. And obviously, if you can't tell by my energy, it has negatively impacted the rating of the book. But we'll of course get to that. First, I do want to give Haley a little bit more praise because I was still highlighting and annotating throughout this book, even in the latter half. So let's read a few of those annotations now. I'm not gonna bore you, okay? Just stick with me. This section of the book is Blair's internal dialogue, and she's basically talking about her fear of having hope that her and Declan could be something again after having went through what they did. That horrible feeling of free falling in my stomach was precisely why hope was so dangerous. You couldn't allow it in, not even a little bit, because I'd spent 4.5 years getting rid of hope, trying to make the reality of his rejection sting less, only for one conversation to let hope seep in through the cracks and and tear everything wide open again. To describe something that's so difficult to articulate in words is pretty impressive, and I think that section in specific was very well done. Now this is a section about Blair and her mother. We were both carrying the same weight up the same mountain, both refusing to share the burden, thinking that shouldering it alone would spare the other, and yet it only made it heavier for both of us. Blair's mother is someone that presents so strong that Blair almost feels like this sudden spurt of emotional energy that's being released from her is wrong because she was never taught and shown that emotions are healthy and that asking people for help and being able to be vulnerable about your emotions is actually right. I loved the relationship between Blair and her mother so much because I think it was a perfect example of how easily generational trauma continues to trickle down the line, because whenever we're young, everything our parents say or do, we take at face value and we kind of absorb that into our psyche, and that becomes the makeup of our adult selves. So I think it's so easy to judge people like Blair for not making decisions that we might, but everyone is comprised of all of the people and all of the experiences that they had in their past. So I think reading about Blair's mother and all of the struggles that she has, expressing her emotions and asking for help, directly correlate with all of Blair's struggles in adulthood, trying to understand why it's so hard for her to let people in, whenever to us as the reader it's so obvious, but to her it's not very clear. So I really appreciate that Haley explored that in depth, and I think she did so pretty well. I think it becomes way too easy as we grow up to ignore our own personal faults and failures and start seeing them within our friends and in our family members, but it's so important that we remind ourselves that we're all just humans trying to do our best, and I think this is the perfect example of that. I found it to harbor resentment toward people not remembering my current affliction, and yet I was forgetting Declan's regularly. It was a pointed reminder that the experiences people didn't witness would never resonate as deeply with them as they did with you. If you wanted them to be appreciated, it was your responsibility to share them. It wasn't on others to understand something they had never seen. Love that, because I'm constantly having to remind myself that if I don't express and explain what I'm feeling, no one will know. And me being upset at them for not knowing that is unfair for one, but is also super self-pitying and really annoying. So I'm so glad that she had that realization, because it's really hard to admit when you're wrong or when you're judging someone because of the grief you're experiencing or because of the hard times that you're currently going through. But I feel like in this book, Blair was incredibly self-aware. Often she would have a thought and then completely contradict it by what she knew to be right. And I find myself doing that a lot. Like, I'll be upset about something, but then I'll explain to myself, well, it's not fair to be upset about that thing because I didn't express myself, or whatever the case is. And I feel like Blair does that a lot in the book, and I really appreciate that. Okay, the last thing I'm gonna read is about Blair specifically. I noticed that a lot of people in Haley's reviews hated Blair, but I think this section of the book describes her in a way that clearly shows that she wasn't taught to emotionally regulate, and she instead tries to think out her emotions so that she won't experience them, but they're currently bubbling inside. So Faye, her friend, asks, "What are you feeling right now?" And Blair says, "I'm thinking about how," and then her friend cuts her off and she says, "I asked what you were feeling, not what you're thinking. You're such a thinker. Think. I'm convinced all your problems would be solved if you just let yourself feel your emotions." That is something that Blair learns to do by the end of the book, but at the beginning, it's something that she clearly does not have a lot of experience doing, so it can be quite aggravating to be reading about a character who is so clearly suppressing all of her emotions. But by the end, to have read about a character who's trying desperately to become the best version of herself despite the grief that she's currently going through, it was super sweet to read about, and it was ultimately pretty rewarding, because I imagine it's pretty difficult to convince a reader that someone has shifted so dramatically in so little time. And I'm not fully convinced yet. I do still think that this character is really young, because by the end of the book, I think they're only like 22, so there's still a lot of learning to do, but I appreciate the growth that we got to see. But I do think that's one of my biggest critiques. This book had so many important, heavy topics within it, like grief and navigating the loss of a loved one, trying to understand yourself in your 20s and navigating generational trauma, and being in love with somebody who you loved as a child, but then something traumatic happened and it's affected every choice you make in your adulthood. But I do think all of these topics could have been more thoroughly explored. I don't think we got the depth that could have really made this book transformative and impactful in a way that I wouldn't forget. I do think that there was opportunity there, especially for it being a new adult, that wasn't fully explored. If this was advertised as a YA, I would think hats off, great job. I would probably even give it a 4 stars, but because it's a contemporary romance and it's new adult, I think we could have went a little bit deeper, and because we didn't, I'm going to give it a 3.5 stars. So still a really good rating, especially coming from me, and I'm actually going to round up to 4 stars for Goodreads, but because the conflicts felt a little bit juvenile, because the grief wasn't explored fully, because these characters are still very much learning and evolving and growing, because there were a few faulty lines regarding sentence structure, and there was even a repeat repeated line at one point, and because there were a handful of overused words, I cannot give it anything higher than that. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think Haley created characters that felt so real, I almost wonder if she's basing them directly on herself and Ryan. I wouldn't be surprised, as this is literally the cover, and that, to me, looks just like them. And I think that especially came true whenever I read the last chapter, which was annotated by Haley.
It's literally scanned in there, my annotations of a chapter.
She made mention of a few things that Blair said directly that she related to, and I think it was pretty obvious, because of how well fleshed out that character was, that she was absolutely pulling from her personal experience in order to write that character. And I don't think that's a problem by any means. It does make me wonder, though, what her next book may bring, and if we're going to keep seeing characters that are super aligned with Blair and Declan. I imagine any critique about Blair would directly affect Haley, so I just want to applaud Haley's vulnerability at handing over such an intimate story, and for doing such a great job at writing one, especially because this is her debut novel, and I haven't forgotten that. So if you guys have read Just Friends, I would love to know what you thought about the book. If you're gonna be hateful, don't do it in my comments, please. But if you want to talk about the book, the comments are a welcome space to do that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in my next video. Bye!